The image of God. Jennifer wants us to cover this in great detail tonight. Is anybody else doing a research paper on the image of God?
I changed mine.
No? Does anybody else even know what they're doing their research paper on? What are you doing yours on, Marvin?
Working on playing on missions or for knowledge is God learning new things.
Okay. Awesome. Good topic. What are you doing?
The theological and pastoral response to the problem of evil.
Okay. Good. Problem of evil. Anybody else? Jordan? No. Jay, Michael? Making a choice yet? That's fine. You don't have to.
Same thing as Ann, although the copy of
Problem of evil?
I already bought this book.
That's fine. You already checked it out, or did you buy it?
I bought it.
Oh. Well, then. Okay. Which one?
The book gone, that's overseen.
Right.
I mean, that's still.
Okay, well, I'm glad that most of you are started. That's good. Let's continue with our discussion of anthropology. We're going to talk about the image of God. You see my opening, I don't know if I should call it a disclaimer or what, but the doctrine is mentioned only sparsely in Scripture, but it's often, it's given a great deal of weight in theological anthropology. And so we have to be careful. Something that isn't explained thoroughly in Scripture is not likely to play, it doesn't seem reasonable to think that it would play a really heavy role in our theology. Now, it certainly has an effect on our theology, and it certainly has an effect on our self-understanding. We just have to be careful about how much heat we throw around in the course of the discussion, in light of the fact that Scripture doesn't specifically define the image of God for us. We have to kind of put this together. So let's see if we can do that in such a way that will be helpful and properly modest. Okay, in Genesis 1, where we have already been, but have not yet discussed the image. Already, but not yet. Genesis 1:26. I'm sorry, am I making big noises? I can't remember. Did I switch over to the other microphone? Okay, but you can hear me okay, my voice?
I could, and now it just sounds a little different.
It sounds a little different. Well, I ate a grilled cheese sandwich. Maybe. I'm going to switch over to the other microphone.
Okay.
And let's see. Does that make a difference?
Yes.
Is it a good difference or a bad one?
Actually, I think the other one's better.
The other one's better. Okay. We'll go with the other one. And and I'll try not to thump on my keyboard so much when I'm pulling up Bible verses. Okay. So in Genesis 1:26, we encounter the terms tselem and demuth, image and likeness. God says to himself, among the persons of the Trinity, I would say, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And that's it. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. Not, he doesn't use the word likeness again, just the word image. In the image of God, he created him. So we don't have a whole lot to go on here, do we? Now observe the passage with me, verses 26 to 28. Are there any clues? Can we fairly say that there are clues here as to what the image of God might involve? Genesis 1, 26 to 28.
Yeah. Our image, the God, refers to.
Okay, interesting. So what do you, so state the clue. What is the clue that you get from that? It's okay to go way out on a limb here. We are recording you, but beyond that, nobody's going to hold you accountable. Aaron doesn't matter, he's a Calvinist. Yeah.
I'm trying that there is a plurality of his being.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's proper or not. But
Plurality is a word. So there's a plurality in God.
Yeah.
And so perhaps,
That's there's more parts of God. Yeah.
okay. Okay, yeah, we won't burn you for saying parts of God, but I think maybe what you're getting at is because there's a plurality of personhood in God, that maybe the image of God involves also a plurality of personhood. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
And so then we wouldn't be surprised to see that that the image of God involved male and female. Perhaps. We're just looking for clues. Okay. Yeah, so it's possible, I'm feeling the urge to, yeah, which would be a particular kind of, a particular way of interpreting the conjunction there. Let's see, after our likeness and let them rule, let them have dominion. So in Hebrew, it's just a conjunction. It's a wow, it's a vav, which can have an inferential flavor to it, so that they, or maybe a purpose result, so that they can. So I would say the Net Bible is going out on a limb there, interpretively. And they're distinguishing between the image and the function of having dominion. Oh. Okay. So now I don't even know what I was going to draw. That took so long.
You're talking about rule about the same time.
Yeah. So he says, in the image and likeness, and then it says, and let them rule. So the question is this how is this connected to this? That's the question. It seems to me that I mean, obviously there's a couple of options. Either the text is saying that God said, let us create them in our likeness, and it's simply like two items on a list. And in addition to that, so I just cleared the page. That's not what I meant to do. Like this, and then there's a question of rule. Let them rule. It's an E. So the question is it two items on a list? Let's make them in our image. Oh, and let's have, or is it an inference? Image and likeness, like the Net Bible says, so that they may rule. In which case, image and likeness is directly related to the ruling. For me, it seems unlikely that they're disconnected.
Well, then you'd have to put creative or creators,
How so?
because he's a creator. It's not necessarily in the text the way rule is, but it would be a quality of what he had just done.
Yes, but right now I'm dealing at the level of the words of the text. Let us make man in our image and let them have dominion. So this is what God is saying. Let us make man and let them have dominion. So right now we're just limiting the question to what's the relationship between those two. Okay? So that's a choice that we have to make. What are some other clues?
Well, within that, one thing I always thought was interesting is in Psalm 8, where it talks about man's dominion over creation and uses a lot of the same terminology to refer back to these verses. It doesn't say that we're made in God's image. I always thought that's really interesting.
Huh.
Because it almost here, I'm like reading that, waiting for it to say that.
Yeah,
And it doesn't.
that's interesting.
And the other two instances in the Bible where it talks about God's image, it does not mention ruler.
Right, right. We're going to go to those. Okay, we're going to go to Genesis 5 in a minute. Another reason why I might think that dominion has something to do with the image of God is that it's brought up again in verse 28. After verse 27, so he created him in his image. Male and female, he created them in the image of God, and it emphasizes image because it's in there twice. And then God blesses them, and he says, be fruitful and multiply and spread across the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the... So once again, God has created them in his image and says, now go and have dominion. So dominion, rule, is obviously a major emphasis in Genesis 1, 26 to 28. God made this amazing world that involved all these living things, and then he created, at the end, he created a particularly unique creature and said, now, creature, go and take care of, rule over what I've just made. Okay, we don't know what all this means yet. We don't know quite how to put it all together yet, but we're observing. Any other observations from Genesis 1? Okay, Genesis 5. I had a friend a number of years ago that said, this is the chapter that reminds me of my mortality. Me, Andy, of my mortality. Because almost every verse in the chapter ends with, Andy died. Andy died. Andy died. Andy died. So, Genesis 5:1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. This is a major, it's called a Toledot statement. One of the major divisions in the book of Genesis. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, the demuth of God. Male and female, he created them. So we have gender again. And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. And then he goes on and begins the genealogy. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. Selim and Demuth, image and likeness. Adam fathered Seth. Seth was in the image and likeness of Adam. So what can we gather from this? Let's not try to be too imaginative or speculative here. Let's just think, common sense, common theological, interpretive sense. What can we gather from the usage of image and likeness here? What is it saying about that relationship between Adam and Seth?
It's really the same quality.
Pardon me?
It's really the same quality.
Okay.
That is, be able to rule.
Okay. Seth had many of the same qualities, let me do that, as Adam, as his father. Right?
And I can even tell the sinfulness that's in Adam.
Okay. Okay. Seth, what's one of the most basic aspects of the relationship between father and a son that he fathers? One of the most basic things. As soon as the baby is born, what's everybody say? Looks like it's whatever. I can never tell. It's like, it's a little blob, cute little blob, usually.
Sometimes.
But it's like, unless there's something like really, really obvious, like a dimpled chin or something, then I usually just can't tell. So qualities include, Seth was like his dad. The word image, selim there, is a visual word. What were you saying?
Something physical, his body has
Okay.
2 legs, not 4 legs.
So there were obvious visual similarities. Seth was like his dad. I just think it's fascinating that it uses image and likeness here. Pretty much, I believe it's the only other time the two words occur together. There may be one other one. I haven't turned the page yet. And it refers to 2 humans. So there's certainly intended to be some very strong parallels between God and humankind. Even though we can't say God made us to look like him, some go so far as to say that he created us in the way that he intended Christ to look in the incarnation, which is sort of a chicken and egg kind of a question. Did Jesus look the way he did because he partook of flesh and blood, like Hebrews says, to be like his brethren? I don't want to get into that. But all this is saying here is that there's a strong likeness, even though it acknowledges in Genesis 5:2 that being in the image of God involved being male and female. So, all right, Genesis 9. Let's keep going. This is in the Noahic covenant, and we're now getting this prohibition against murder. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. Okay, so therefore, to mar the image of God or to destroy a particular instantiation, it's a word you should learn, of the image of God, a particular example, case of the image of God, is evil. If you destroy the image of God, then you must be destroyed. That's what God says here in the Noahic covenant. So it exalts the life of humans. The fact that we are made in the image of God gives us a particular kind of value and maybe responsibility. Well, any other suggestions, any other clues that we might find here in Genesis 9 about what the image of God might be or the importance of it?
No, one thing is it's not qualified by a certain type of person.
Okay? Say more about that. Explain what you mean.
All people everywhere have the image of God.
Okay.
It doesn't make any qualifications.
Okay. Not male versus, as a matter of fact, male and female are explicitly included,
Correct.
right? Because he just said in the previous verse, male and female would both be included. So important. So all human persons. Okay? First, boy, I hesitate to even go here, but 1 Corinthians 11:7. Okay, we are not here to discuss length of hair, head coverings, relationship of angels to the church. It's not why we're here.
Have you, real quick,
Yes.
were you aware, there's a head covering movement. I ran across it in Christianity Today and Modernism.com. It's a group out there, apparently making some waves.
I think I saw a reference to it. Are they associated with any particular ecclesiastical tradition? Like, are they?
I didn't look into that.
Okay.
It seemed like Baptists address like Pentecostals. to me.
Say that again? They what?
It seemed like Baptists address like Pentecostals.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Because of the head coverings. In my experience, it's only the oneness Pentecostals that dress with the head covering.
They're probably not allowed to wear shorts
Okay.
or women are probably not allowed to. That's what I'm gathering from just watching the videos.
If you can find the link to that, would you send it to me? I'd like to see that. Okay.
All right.
1 Corinthians 11:7. We're right in the middle of a context here, and Paul is making the argument that, at least I believe that Paul is making the argument here that worship, he's going to go on later to say worship must be orderly, and here he's saying that worship must exclude all elements of cultural, here he's talking about paganness, that men mustn't cover their heads because that's how pagans worshiped. And in doing so, he's covering the image and glory of God. And a woman should cover herself because of the pagan practice of uncovering or shaving her head. And that's all we're going to say about it for now, because all we're trying to get to is the point that Paul is making here when he connects it to the image and glory of God. Okay, verse 7 says, "For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man." So anyway, the creation order is there. And the connection that he's making is that a man mustn't cover his head. Here, the context is corporate worship. And the pagan practice was to cover the head when you were praying to the gods. But he's saying you mustn't do that because the man, because he is the image and glory of God. The image and glory of God. Now, glory is not parallel to likeness in the Old Testament, but image here, icon, would be. That would be. That's where we get it's the Greek word that we get the English word icon from. It's an image. He wants that image to show. So, really, all we can get from the text, from the way the text talks about the image of God explicitly, is that man is like God. And that it's somehow associated with his dominion, his uniqueness over creation. I think we could even see a hint of that in 1 Corinthians 11. We certainly see the uniqueness in Genesis 9, where the life of a human is exalted above the life, all other lives. Because see, in the same context, God is saying, you can now eat animals, but you mustn't kill a human being. Right? That's really all we can say. But people get into huge arguments about long developed arguments about what the image of God is. There's another set of data that we can look at, and that's how Christ is portrayed as the image of God. Colossians 1:15. And here we have this word icon or icon being used to refer to describe Christ. He is the
Can you discuss all the other data you think in terms of arguments, talking about intellect and mental capacity and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. We'll try to draw that together here as under capital B. We'll talk about that. So we have several mentions in the New Testament of Christ in relation to the image of God and how Christ himself is the image of God. Colossians 1:15, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. And he goes on to talk about he is the one who is over all of the universe. But it says he is the image of the invisible God, the icon of the invisible God. So an image is something that you can see, right? So he is the visible image. Ephesians 4:24. No, that's not right. That shouldn't be on the same line. In Colossians 1:15, when it says he is the image of the invisible God, and I think the Hebrews 1:3 says something similar, but it doesn't use the word icon. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. Imprint is character there. It's the word we get character from. The exact imprint of his nature. So Hebrews 1:3 says something similar. I think in Colossians 1, the emphasis is simply that Christ is the one who makes God visible because he is God incarnate. He is the image of the invisible God. I don't think that that's a statement that makes a connection to the image of God in man. But the two may connect here in a minute. Now Ephesians 4:24. We got to go up a little bit. Paul's exhorting us about the way we are to live because of how we have learned Christ in verse 20. We learn to put, verse 22, to put off your old self. Verse 23, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, which is created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. So we have the word likeness there. And it's let's see. And that's really kind of an extrapolation in the process of interpretation, or in the process of translation. Because what the Greek says is simply which has been created after God. So the word likeness doesn't appear in Greek. But obviously the intent is there. To say that the new self is created after God. There's a likeness that is intended in the new self. Okay? Keep going. We'll put it all together here. Romans 8:29. The great passage about how God, what was it B.B. Warfield called it, the golden chain of salvation? Was it Warfield? I can't remember. It may have been like way back, Augustine or somebody. Speaking about the sovereignty of God, we can say that in this class, right, Aaron? Those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. So Christ is the image of God, and we are destined to be conformed to the image, the iconos of his Son. And then 2 Corinthians 3:18. Boy, and it's really tough to jump right into the middle of this one here, and we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image, the image of the glory of the Lord, from one degree of glory to another, from one degree of glory to another. Now, again, we don't have that explicit phrase, image of God, or image and likeness of God. We don't have that in the New Testament. What we do have is the idea that Christ is the image of God. He is the one who makes God visible. And we are predestined to be conformed to his image. And as we are sanctified, or as we are progressively sanctified, we are being conformed to that image, from one degree of likeness to another.
So
Be more and more like him.
are you saying then that Adam was created righteous and holy originally before the fall? He was, and that's what the image and likeness, and it's gone, and now then we're coming back to it in what Christ has done.
Yeah, I mean that is one view of the image of God, is that Christ brings us back into the image of God. Some would say, I don't take this view, but some would say the image of God has been lost. That doesn't work, I don't think, because in Genesis 9, mankind is still in the image of God, and that's why we can't murder. But I think that this language of image in the New Testament, as it's associated with Christ, is a way to speak about us being, about us being restored in the image of God in the New Testament. It's that language of restoration. I don't think that it's enough to say that Christ is the image of God in the same sense that mankind was created in the image of God. So how do we put it all together? Capital B, formulation of the Imago Dei is the Latin phrase for image of God, and I put it in there because theological books will use the term Imago Dei pretty regularly, so you need to know what it means. So here's what I believe we should take as a guiding principle. Because the image of God is related to humanity's role of ruling the earth on God's behalf, it seems reasonable to think of the image of God as the unique features of humanity that reflect the Creator and set us apart for the task of dominion. So in this regard, man is like God, and man represents God. And I believe those are the two key words that Grudem uses, that man is like God and represents God. It's Grudem. So I like that there's a fullness there that I think that's helpful, that man is like God and man represents God. But to me, the unifying theme is dominion. It's dominion. Now, other views of the image of God, Marvin was mentioning this. Some will say that the image of God is simply the fact that we are rational creatures. We're rational creatures. Or we're relational creatures. That we're able to have relationships. Actually, I'm gonna get into that. Let's just follow the notes. So for me, the unifying theme is dominion. That we're made in the image of God so that we can have dominion. We are made as God's co-regents for the world. And if you think about it in the Genesis 1 and 2 sense, pre-fall, thinking about the creation being created very good, God has created this world, and he's created mankind as the pinnacle of that creation. And he gives creation over to mankind and says, here, go, multiply, take my image and spread it across the earth and take care of it. Adam was put in the garden to keep it, to work it and to keep it. That's the language of service. The language of caretaking and so forth. And so he is, he's put there to rule over it. And so God created him for that purpose. But he wasn't supposed to stay there. Be fruitful and multiply, spread across the earth, and do this wherever you are, so that my image is imprinted all over my creation. My image as the good creator, the caretaker, the ruler.
What if you just thought in terms of something being restored in Christ, how does it relate to that in terms of
Yeah. What's
being restored, what was lost, and what's being restored?
Yeah. In Genesis 6, how is it phrased? If you think about the commissioning of Adam and Eve in Genesis 1, be fruitful, multiply, spread across the earth, and have dominion over it. And then you go to Genesis 6. Whoops. Genesis 6:14. Starting in verse 5. And I think that the sons of God, the first 4 verses, are a way of illustrating how bad things had gotten on the earth. Okay. Verse 5 says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Wait. There was another one I was looking for. Okay. So he saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was evil, only evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I've created from the face of the land, man and animals, for I'm sorry, and so forth. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. That's the verse I was looking for. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And it reiterates in verse 13, the earth is filled with violence through them. So the commission was, be fruitful, multiply, and spread across the earth. Implication, fill it with my image and rule over it on my behalf. What had they done? They had corrupted the human race and therefore had corrupted the earth. And so now the earth was filled with violence and corruption instead. In the eschaton, in the new heavens and the new earth, what is even beginning in the millennium, what is the scenario? God himself and the Lamb live here. There is no temple because there's no sun. He is the temple. He is the light. And we dwell with him, and we will, it says, and we will reign. I'm not thinking of the passage off the top of my head. Paul refers to it in the future sense, that we will reign with him. And we see it in the new heavens and the new earth as well. That it's portrayed in a sense of rulership over the earth. Now, I think it's going to be something better than what Adam would have done if he hadn't sinned, because we will have been redeemed. And so I think it's going to be something that's even better. But it is, again, cast in terms of ruling with him. So the fact that we have fallen is that we have corrupted not only ourselves, but everything. And it will all be redeemed and restored and renewed. Okay? Yeah, I'm going to argue that right here. Under number 4. Yep. So what I'm suggesting, the way that I formulate the image of God, is the unique features of humanity that reflect the Creator and set us apart for the task of dominion. So what are those features? And I've got 4 of them here. Personhood. We have moral agency and responsibility. No other aspect of creation, no other creature has that. We have relationships where love is manifest, hence the inclusion of gender and sexuality in Genesis 1:28, male and female. We have relationships where love is manifest and where we have, the family, the marriage and family relationship that we see at the end of Genesis 2, that a man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife, and the two become one flesh, and so forth. Emotional sophistication, the ability to consider and control our responses. Now, I'm not well, the next point essentially says it. Moral agency, well, at least some aspects of these things are not enough. Like angels are also persons. Animals manifest a kind of relational and emotional life. Animals get attached to each other. They get attached to us. They give evidence that they are aware of those relationships, but they're not self-aware in the same way that we are. They can't consider their responses the way that we do. That's why I included that qualifier under emotional sophistication, the ability to consider and control our responses. That's a kind of self-awareness that animals appear not to have. So personhood would be one aspect, but it's not enough to simply assert personhood as the image of God. Rationality is an aspect of the image of, wait a minute. Did I miss one? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Rationality, the ability to think abstractly. Not just the ability to pick up a stick and use it to pull ants out of an anthill, okay, as a tool, which some primates do apparently. But the idea that we can reason about the process of doing that. You know, we can design a better stick. But the idea to philosophize about our existence, there's, again, that back to that self-awareness, another aspect of that self-awareness. To think scientifically, we don't see any other species, as intelligent as they may be, we don't see them inventing things, doing scientific research, and so forth. So again, I'm not denying that there is such a thing as intelligence in other creatures. There is such a thing. I mean, my dog definitely has a kind of intelligence, and it is maddening at times because she employs it to drive me nuts. She knows exactly what I'm saying when I say come here. She knows exactly what I want her to do, and she stands there and stares at me. Self-awareness and forethought. But again, we can't say that rationality is the image of God, simply because angels are not made in the image of God, and they display, as far as we can tell, rationality. And then the last thing is dominion, and I think dominion is, again, what ties it all together. Dominion is delegated to us by God. He is the ruler of creation, but he has delegated that role to us. And to properly fulfill that purpose, we must reflect God's care of and rule over his creation on his behalf. And so I do think that there is a proper place in our theology for a reasonable approach to creation care. Creation care is a term that is used more in theological circles, maybe evangelical circles, as opposed to ecology or I don't know. But creation care is a sufficiently theological term that reflects a little bit of this task of dominion that God has given us. And reasonable steps to care for the creation that God has made, I think, is a good thing. We should actively try to care for creation. That doesn't mean I think we should jump on every pseudoscientific bandwagon that comes along in the name of saving the planet. I just read an article recently about, actually I didn't read it, I noted it and saved it, and I need to go back and read it, about how recycling is completely pointless. It costs way more money than it's worth. The process of recycling actually probably puts more carbon back into the atmosphere. The materials that are reclaimed may not be particularly useful anyway, and so forth. And it's like, man, I mean, I was never a recycling Nazi, but at least I felt like I was, I mean, I've been to landfills in Southern California, and anything we can do to reduce that, and what seems like a good thing, but I am convinced that regions of the planet probably are warming. I'm not convinced that it's our fault that that's happening. I think it's just as likely that it's cycles that the planet goes through.
Well, it's funny, the last meeting that we had in France, they were saying for all, I think they were all, as nations together, they were going to lower the earth temperature by 2 degrees. So that's,
Isn't that great?
maybe that's
Anyway, I have to chuckle, when I see the scare claims on one side, the Earth is getting too hot, and then on the other side, NASA's reporting that the polar ice caps are bigger than they've been in, whatever number of years, many years.
It's like, do you think it's like the whole idea of evolution attacks this aspect more than the other than or at least in terms of the name, like name this another animal, not sort of that it removes that aspect.
Yeah, if you were going to affirm an evolutionary understanding of mankind in particular, you would have to, take one of those views that says God specifically entered into relationship with particular hominids that had developed, and those became the human race that were made after his image, and the rest went extinct, or I don't know. But you would have to account for that somehow. You're right. Otherwise, man is just another animal, and why would we have dominion over the other animals? Yeah. Okay. Implications for the image of God. We've actually already talked about a few. We were just talking about that one. For origins, humans aren't just another animal. God breathed the breath of life into Adam and brought Eve from him. Animal rights. Animals do not have the same rights as humans. That doesn't mean that more cruelty is better than less cruelty, by the way. I think that creation care, proper creation care, involves, a certain kind of ethics for animals. We see that in the Old Testament, don't we? I mean, you care for your animals. You don't abuse your animals. And you help your neighbor. If their animal is in distress for whatever reason, and they're, your neighbor isn't aware of it, then you go and help that animal. That you were supposed to care for your livestock. But that doesn't mean that they have the same rights as human beings. And I think we've seen some of the nuttiness that brings about. Ecology, exercising dominion, doesn't mean destructively consuming. We don't say it's all going to burn anyway, so it doesn't matter what we do. Let's pollute to our heart's content. It's not so much the global warming so much as it is the poisonous things we do to the world around us and to our food and to ourselves. So destructively consuming. And this doesn't involve, well, I don't want to get into that. None of this means I'm anti-hunting, by the way. The Noahic covenant is something we can be grateful for and participate in, even in a sportsmanlike way, if we so choose. That's fine. Coming to the South, I'm particularly happy for the Noahic covenant every time I have barbecue. But I'm celebrating God's good provision for the human race. Number 4, capital punishment. Murder is a unique crime. Now, in Genesis 9, it calls for capital punishment. That's not the end of the argument. The way the capital punishment has been implemented in human society is often deeply flawed, and I can't even say that I'm sure I endorse it in its current form, because innocent people are executed and the process is convoluted and so forth. But the principle is there that human life is more important than other other lives, other living things, to the point where capital punishment is called for by God. And you can have a legitimate debate about whether it's still called for. Um, I have friends who are believers. One of them is a theologian who is an activist against capital punishment because of the injustices that are commonly perpetrated in the process. And I have to say that I'm impacted by that. Number 5, abortion. This is probably the most obvious one. A human life is taken in the process of doing an abortion, and that life is in the image of God, right? It's not an unborn baby is not a potential human life. It's a human life with potential, and it must be treated that way. Racism, probably one of the areas where the church has failed most miserably is in the area of ethnic relationships, racism. My cousin, a cousin who professes Christ, and she just finished a PhD in American literature, and her dissertation was on Civil War era slave literature, and so she's done a lot of research into the whole slavery thing and the remnants of racism as they continue to the present day, although that's not her primary field. One of the things I noticed, my whole family, my wife and my daughter that came with me when we moved here from California, one of the first things we noticed was when we moved to Cabot, everybody's white. Everybody in the town of Cabot. And that was a shock to our system because we were so accustomed to multiracial and multi-ethnic environment. And the church has, that's society, but the church has, for many years, subtly or not so subtly, upheld different kinds of racism. And some of them as recently as the late 20th century, and places like Bob Jones University and their dating policies, that students of different races weren't allowed to date and that sort of thing. Baffling stuff. I wrote a little piece. It was a blog post some years ago. It was right around the time that some wacko Baptist, why are they always Baptist? Guy somewhere wrote this thing about how this interracial couple was not allowed to come to his church, because one of them was white, the other one was black. And or they weren't allowed to get married, maybe it was, I don't remember. And I wrote this little thing about how, as Christian people who genuinely are followers of Jesus Christ, not only allow interracial marriage, we rejoice in it. Because it shows, among other things, it shows how all of us are the same in God's eyes. We are all one family, regardless of the color of our skin. Human being is human being. And anyway, nothing drives me crazier than racism. And part of that is because I see the elements of it in my own life as a result of the upbringing that I had in super conservative, fundamentalist, Bob Jonesy kind of traditions. And it's really ugly when the church, and if we had a proper understanding of the image of God, then we would be the chief enemies of racism and racial injustices. All right. James 3 talks about how we don't curse and mock others because they are made in the image of God. We got to value the image of God in other people. We already talked about order in the church, 1 Corinthians 11. So, we might summarize by saying that being made in God's image means that we are the supreme reflection of his love.
Have you heard of the argument that, would you agree that sexual sin in general and homosexuality specifically is a
that sexual sin and homosexuality in particular is an attack on the image of God?
Well, I say in particular, not so often.
Okay. You just mean including that? Yeah.
I've read that argument. Much recently.
Yeah. And rooted in God's design of the human race, because he designed us male and female.
Yeah, it's an attack, sexual sin in general. It's
Yeah.
an attack on the image of God in some way. It was not clear.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I would say, and this is off the top of my head, if I had a chance to read that article, I haven't seen it. I might be persuaded to a stronger view, but off the top of my head, sexual sin is often oppressive in one way or another. It takes advantage of another. In that sense, it is a form of oppression or a form of abuse and I would see that as an attack on the image of God. And then homosexual sin would be, I would see it indirectly as an attack on the image of God, because the image of God is male and female. And that's how God designed us to be, to reflect his image as his co-regents on the earth. So in that sense, yeah, I could see it as maybe an indirect attack on the image of God. And sexual sin in general, maybe I'm talking myself into it. Sexual sin in general, it is a detriment. I want to be careful, but it's a detriment to human flourishing. And as created in the image of God, God intends human beings to flourish in his creation. Now, in a fallen world, that will happen only within the context of the redeemed community. But at the same time, we should seek human flourishing for the race in general. And sexual sin is, I think, a detriment to human flourishing, because it fractures the family unit that God intended to be the basis of human society. And so, yeah, so I guess sexual sin is, in a way, it's an attack on the image of God. You talked me into it. Hold on. That's an interesting thought. I've never thought about that before. I've thought about it more in terms of design, that it's contrary to God's design, and so it's not good for us. I mean, you can go beyond that with homosexuality and say that that marriage is intended to portray a redemptive relationship. I mean, it's supposed to be a redemptive relationship, but it's supposed to portray, Christ and the church and redemption.
If you include in the mandate, I think as regards homosexuality, the sexual sin in general, the mandate to multiply, replenish, all that together, in terms of will over, homosexuality is a direct attack on that, in terms of, because homosexual cannot replenish.
Right.
Multiply,
Yeah. Yeah.
And little images of God are not spread throughout the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense to me. Yep. Yeah, there's some good stuff going on at ETS this week on that topic that I was hoping to be there to hear, but Brian's there and I'll have to give you a full report. All right, any questions about the image of God? This is something I've kind of changed my view on over the years. I used to see it as a more generic, the image of God is basically the set of attributes that we possess that set us apart from the rest of creation. But I think that unless you include the theme of dominion as the purpose for the image of God, if not the image itself, then you're missing the point in Genesis 1. So, and that really has made me think differently about things like ecology, creation care, animal rights, things like that. There was this has been some years ago now. It was may go all the way back to what? No, not Francis Schaeffer. No, he had some good things to say about that too. But I'm thinking of, there was this dogfighting ring that was exposed. This has been some years ago. And I don't know if it was related to Michael Vick or not. That may be what popped into my head because I'm a Steelers fan, and Vick is now playing for the Steelers, although he's injured now. But and I remember I was listening to Rush Limbaugh. This was back in my Rush Limbaugh day. I don't listen to Rush Limbaugh. I don't have any patience for it. And it was either him or some other conservative talk radio host that was saying, that it's like, it's their property. Let people do what they want with their property, right? They're not hurting people. And I thought, this is a difference between me as a political conservative and me as a follower of Christ, who understands that I'm made in the image of God. That is wrong, and there should be laws against that, because it is better that there be less cruelty in the world than that there be more cruelty. And that is a program that advances cruelty. And therefore it should be opposed simply because it advances cruelty. And my reasoning for that is theological. His reasoning was economic. Anyway, I haven't thought about that for years. I don't know why that just now popped into my head, but thinking differently about the image of God does cause you to think differently about issues that you encounter on a pretty regular basis. Yeah.
So, question for you, but hold on the image of God.
Yeah.
You move back up that teacher. You mentioned racism.
Yeah.
What would be your definition of racism? Wow. I don't even put it on the spot with that.
No, that's good. Hey, it's my job to be put on the spot. That's fine. I can't say that I've ever sat down and thought about it long enough to say, here's my definition of racism. So this is my knee-jerk definition of racism. And that is, see, I tend to think of it as a hard issue. And so that's the approach that my, knee-jerk, off the top of my head kind of reaction is. To think of another human being as different, as fundamentally different from me because of the color of their skin or their ethnic origin. When I see them as an other, in some other kind of category than me, then I'll be tempted to see them as somehow less than me. So then race, that attitude can be institutionalized in terms of treating a particular group of people differently because of the color of their skin or because of their. It's not always skin color, Sometimes it's the injustice is targeted at a nationality. I didn't know this, but in the early days of the U.S., after the U.S., like before we abolished slavery, there were lots and lots of white slaves, especially in the West, on the frontier. And they were Irish. People that had fled Ireland and were enslaved in the U.S. I never knew that. So anyway, it can take the form. That shows you that it's not just about the color of your skin. It's about some other perceived advantage that you think you have over someone else.
Although the extreme of that was, I've seen two such plain documents, pamphlets, that basically tried to argue that Negroes is the word they use, were
Right.
not human, in the
Right.
sense that white people were. But that's very extreme form of it. And tried to argue from scripture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just lesser humans, but not humans, not
Right.
not poor.
Yeah. That's Nazi Germany did the same thing with Jewish people. Yeah, there were there were theological, I have systematic theology. I was telling a couple of guys that were just in my house recently, I have at least one systematic theology on my shelf at home, written by a fairly well-known Southern Presbyterian, Civil War era Southern Presbyterian, who helped to defend slavery from a biblical theological perspective. It's horrifying. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I'm not sure if that helps you at all, or if you had some other agenda. Okay. Yeah. It was just, I'm using racism in the sort of the popular, CNN.com sense, not any highly developed, refined sense. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to call it there because that's a good place to stop. We will begin hamartiology next time, next week, which is, I believe, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Next week is Thanksgiving week. So don't leave town too soon. Stay here for Tuesday night. And we'll see how far we can get.
So we're opening up here, opening up the library. For the CBC John Holden.
CBC will be closed.
We typically got to keep the other building.
I have a key to the other building. But those other two classrooms are both in use. Those are the only two we have access to. I'll send you a message. It may not be in this room, but we'll, as far as I know, we're going to meet. Okay. Any questions from Stuttgart?
No, sir.
Okay.